They didn't knock. That was the first thing I noticed. 3 of them came through my gate like they owned the place because, apparently, they believed they did. The woman in front carried a clipboard and a laminated badge that read, HOA President. Behind her, a man in a polo shirt who introduced himself as the property manager, and another in khakis who said he was compliance. None of them asked permission. None of them waited at the gate. They walked straight into my yard and started photographing everything: my house, my fence line, my outbuildings, my truck parked on gravel my father poured in 1981. I was standing on my own porch when the HOA president looked up at me like I was the one who didn't belong. This structure falls within the HOA's jurisdiction, she said. Her voice had the flat confidence of someone who had never, in her entire adult life, been wrong about anything that mattered. We've identified 14 code violations. Your total outstanding balance is $5,200. She peeled an orange notice from her clipboard and slapped it against my front door without asking. We're posting formal notice today. I looked at the notice on my door. Then I looked at her. The land your house is sitting on, she said, is HOA property now. That changed when the community was built. She said it like it was already settled. Like the paperwork had been filed, the judge had signed it, and I simply hadn't been informed yet. Behind her, the property manager raised his phone and pointed it directly at my face. He photographed me. Then my truck. Then my mailbox. Slow and deliberate, like he was cataloging a crime scene, and I was the crime. We have 196 families in this community, the HOA president continued. She tilted her clipboard toward me like a teacher presenting a failing grade to a student who should have known better. We will not allow a single holdout to destabilize what we've built here. Pay the fines, comply with the codes, or we begin lien proceedings by the end of the month. She meant it as a threat. She delivered it like a closing argument. I didn't say a word. She was standing on my land, threatening to take it. She had the wrong map, the wrong assumption, and absolutely no idea who she was dealing with. I've thought about that afternoon a lot since then. There's something almost fascinating in a grim sort of way about watching someone construct an airtight legal case on a foundation that doesn't exist. The HOA president had her badge, her freshly printed fine schedule, her polo-shirted team, and the absolute certainty of a woman who had never once had anyone push back hard enough to matter. You could hear it in the cadence of her delivery, practiced, clipped, final. She had stood in front of other homeowners in this community and said these exact same things, and they had folded, paid the fines, gone quiet, repainted their shutters and adjusted their garbage cans, and decided the fight wasn't worth the cost. The compliance man had produced a retractable tape measure and was marking the distance from my fence post to what he believed was the property line. He called out numbers in a low voice. The property manager wrote them down. No one addressed me again. No one asked my name. I was furniture in a house they had already mentally reassigned to someone else. Then I noticed the plat map tucked under the HOA president's arm. It was a large format survey, the kind developers print on stiff paper for sales offices and presentations. I recognized the logo in the lower right corner immediately. The developer's survey, the same document his representative had spread across my kitchen table 3 years ago when he came to make his buyout offer. The one I'd declined without much deliberation. I knew exactly what that survey showed. I also knew what it didn't show. The date in the corner read 2019, the year they broke ground. That survey didn't go back far enough. Not by 45 years. But I kept my hands in my pockets and said nothing about that. I just watched. They finished their walk around. The compliance man capped his tape measure and tucked it into his vest pocket. The property manager reviewed his notes with a small, satisfied nod. The HOA president gave my house one last look. The particular kind of look that is already redesigning the space, already measuring for something newer, and walked back through my gate without another word to me. I stood on the porch for a long moment after they left. The afternoon was quiet except for the low sound of construction somewhere deeper in the subdivision. 196 homes, occupied, mortgaged, belonging, so those families believed to them. I peeled the orange notice off my door carefully, folded it once along the crease they'd put in it, and set it flat on the kitchen table. Then I walked to the back of the house, pulled open the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet my father had bolted to the wall in 1989, because he always said anything worth keeping was worth anchoring down. The deed was right where it always was. right where it had been since 1974. What she didn't know, what not one of those 196 families knew, was that the deed to every inch of ground their entire community sat on had been recorded in my family's name since 1974, and I still had the original. To understand how any of this was possible, you have to go back to 1974. My father was not a complicated man. He worked, he saved, and when he found a piece of land he believed in, he bought it. 47 acres on the edge of what was then a quiet county road open fields, a stand of oak on the eastern edge, and enough flat ground to build a life on. He recorded the deed at the county deed office on the 14th of March 1974, paid the filing fee in cash, drove home and told my mother they owned something real. I grew up on that land, inherited it when my father passed, and every single year, without exception, I paid the property taxes on that parcel, same parcel identification number, year after year. I knew it by memory the way some people know their social security number. It wasn't something I had to look up. The land sat largely open for decades. We used the western portion near the house. The rest we left alone: grass, scrub, the occasional deer. There was no particular plan for it. It was simply ours, and we kept it that way. That changed about 3 years before the afternoon the HOA president walked through my gate uninvited. A man in a company car came to my door. Youngish, pleasant, armed with a folder of renderings and a practiced smile. He represented a residential developer who had identified our acreage, along with a few adjoining parcels, as the site for a planned community. He had a number ready. It was a reasonable number. I thanked him, told him I wasn't interested, and closed the door. He said they'd look at other options. I didn't think much of it. People make offers on land all the time. You say no, they move on. What I didn't know, and what I have since spent considerable time reconstructing, is what happened next in that developer's office. They hired a title company to run a search on the parcel before proceeding. A title search is supposed to trace the chain of ownership all the way back, link by link, confirming that whoever is selling actually has the legal right to sell. It's not complicated work. It's methodical. You pull records. You go back far enough. You make sure there are no breaks in the chain. This particular title company went back to 2010 and stopped. Whatever their reasoning, whatever their shortcuts, they did not pull the 1974 recording. They issued a clean certificate, meaning they declared the title clear, the chain unbroken, and the sale legally sound. The developer relied on that certificate. He purchased the land. He broke ground. 26 months later, 196 homes had been built, sold, and occupied. Each buyer had received a deed from the developer. Each buyer believed they owned what they were told they owned. Their mortgages were real. Their equity was real. Their lives were real. The problem was that none of those deeds were valid, because the developer had never validly owned the land in the first place. He had bought something that wasn't for sale from someone who didn't have the right to sell it because nobody had bothered to look back far enough to find my father's name on a document from 1974. The HOA formed shortly after the last homes closed. Bylaws were drafted, a board was elected, and a woman named Renee, last name I'll leave out, though I suspect she's given enough people reason to remember, it won the presidency by running on a platform of strict enforcement and maintained property values. She had a gift for authority, or at least a gift for performing it convincingly. Within her first year on the board, she had established a fine schedule that most small municipalities would have found aggressive. Garbage cans left at the curb past 8 in the morning, $60. A door wreath in an unapproved color, formal warning, then fine. Guest parking violations, $80, no grace period. The 196 homeowners, most of them with mortgages, most of them with families, most of them people who simply wanted a decent place to live, they paid. Quietly, mostly. You learn quickly that the cost of fighting a fine is higher than the cost of paying it, and HOA boards understand that calculation better than anyone. Then Renee reviewed the community plat one afternoon and found my property. The farmhouse sat right at the edge of what she believed was HOA-controlled land. No HOA sticker, no compliant fencing. No record of dues paid because I had never been asked to pay dues, because I had never been contacted as a resident, because I was not a resident of her community. I was the man whose land her community had been built on. She didn't see it that way. She saw a holdout, a squatter, as she would later call me in writing, at community meetings, in posts on the neighborhood forum. She decided to handle it the way she handled everything, systematically, officially, and with the full weight of her laminated badge behind her. What she did not do was pull the county deed records. The morning after her compliance team visited my property, I received the first HOA notice in the mail. I looked at it for a moment, the letterhead, the fine schedule, the tone of absolute institutional certainty, and then I drove to the county recorder's office and pulled my own records. The 1,974 deed was right there, exactly where my father had filed it. Never transferred, never encumbered. My name on it now, his before mine. I drove home and called an attorney I'd known for years, described what I'd found. He listened without interrupting. "Don't say a word yet," he said. "Not one word to them. Let's see how far they go." I thanked him, hung up, and walked to the filing cabinet in the back room, opened the bottom drawer. The deed was there, the original, sealed in a manila envelope my father had labeled in his careful block handwriting. I closed the drawer and left it alone. For now. 30 days passed. I hadn't heard from the HOA directly, no follow-up visit, no phone call, just silence on their end, which I'd learned by then was not the same as inaction. These organizations don't idle, they process. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. HOA attorney letterhead, a real firm, not a paralegal with a notary stamp. I signed for it at the door, carried it to the kitchen table, and opened it with the same letter opener my father had kept in the junk drawer for 40 years. The fines had grown. Between the original notice and a second round of violations they'd apparently assessed while photographing my property, the total outstanding balance was now $12,400. The letter informed me that a lien would be filed against the property in 14 days if payment was not received in full. It referred to my land, my house, my outbuildings, my gravel driveway as an HOA-controlled parcel in non-compliance. They had assigned it a lot number. My family's land now had an HOA lot number. At the bottom of the letter, in the signature block beneath the attorney's name, was a case reference number. They were organized. I'd give them that. 3 days later, they came back. This time, the HOA president brought company. The man beside her wore a better suit than the compliance team had managed mid-50s, leather portfolio, the kind of posture that signals someone who bills by the hour. He introduced himself as the HOA's legal counsel. The HOA president stood slightly behind him, the way people do when they've decided the situation has escalated beyond clipboard territory. The attorney spoke first. He held out a document, the HOA's title certificate, printed on heavy stock with the developer's name embossed at the top. He offered it to me the way someone offers a bill to a restaurant patron who has been stalling on payment. Patient, practiced, faintly condescending. "This is the recorded chain of title establishing HOA's ownership of this parcel," he said. He enunciated carefully, the way people do when they've decided they're speaking to someone who needs things simplified. "I want to make certain you understand your situation. You have 30 days to come into compliance with HOA codes and pay the outstanding balance. If you do not comply, we will initiate eviction proceedings. If you do not vacate, we will pursue that through the courts." He let that land. Then the HOA president stepped around him. She pointed past me toward the back of the property, my outbuildings, the old equipment shed my father had built and I'd repaired twice. "Those structures will also need to come down," she said. "They violate setback requirements. The HOA owns the underlying land, and your presence here is at our discretion." She paused to make sure the last part registered. At our discretion, like she was the one doing me the favor of allowing me to exist on my own property for a few more weeks. 2 of my neighbors happened to be walking past on the road at that moment. Eileen, the retired school teacher from 3 doors into the subdivision, and Frank, the veteran who lived across from her. They slowed. I could see them watching from the corner of my eye. The HOA president had seen them too. She didn't lower her voice. She wanted witnesses. She wanted it on the record, in front of people, that she had delivered this notice personally and professionally to the squatter who was disrupting her community. She wanted the neighborhood to see her doing her job. I took the demand letter from the attorney's hand. I looked at the HOA president. I said, "Thank you," and I closed the door. I didn't sign anything. I didn't argue a single point. I didn't raise my voice or challenge one word of what they'd said. I heard them on the porch for another few seconds, the shuffle of the attorney returning his portfolio to his arm, the HOA president saying something in a low voice I didn't try to make out, and then the sound of footsteps on gravel and a car door closing. I sat at the kitchen table with the demand letter and the title certificate in front of me. $12,400. 14 days to lien. Eviction proceedings. HOA lot number assigned to land recorded in my name in 1974. I picked up the title certificate and looked at it carefully. The developer's name, the 2019 survey. The chain of ownership building forward from the developer's purchase link by link, clean and confident and completely unaware of what it was missing. That evening, I drove to my attorney's office. He's a property law specialist, the kind of lawyer who has spent 30 years in county courthouses and can read a chain of title the way most people read a menu. I set the HOA's document on his desk without explanation. He put on his reading glasses, started at the top, turned the page, slowed down, flipped back 3 pages, ran his finger along a line, and stopped. He looked up. They never pulled the 1,974 recording, he said. It wasn't a question. Their entire chain starts in 2019. He set the document down and took off his glasses. There's a 45-year gap in the title, and they just handed it to you. Personally, certified mail. He almost smiled. With a return receipt. He leaned back in his chair. We sat with that for a moment. Then he told me what he wanted to do. Not yet. Not a letter. Not a counter notice. Nothing that would give the HOA's attorney time to amend their filing or quietly correct the gap before it became a liability. He wanted to prepare a full response packet deed, tax records, the HOA's own certificate with the gap highlighted, and hold it until a formal hearing, where it could be entered as evidence in open court with no opportunity for workarounds. If we tip them off now, he said, they go looking for a fix. If we wait, they walk into court thinking they've already won. I told him to wait. I drove home, walked to the back room, opened the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet. The deed was still there, exactly where my father left it, exactly where I needed it to be. Their title certificate had a gap 45 years wide. And they just handed it to me personally, certified mail, with a return receipt. She knocked so quietly I almost missed it. I'd been at the kitchen table going through my attorney's preliminary notes when I heard it 3 small taps, the kind of knock that's already apologizing for itself before the door opens. I looked through the window first out of habit. A woman, late 70s, standing back from the door with her hands folded in front of her. I recognized her. Eileen, the retired school teacher I'd seen walking past with Frank the afternoon the HOA attorney had delivered his ultimatum on my porch. I opened the door. She introduced herself properly, though I'd already placed her. She lived 4 houses into the subdivision, one of the 196. She'd watched the HOA president and the attorney leave my property 3 days earlier and had spent those 3 days deciding whether to come. I don't want any trouble, she said. The first thing out of her mouth. Before she told me her name clearly, before she said what she wanted, before anything else. I don't want any trouble. That told me everything I needed to know about what it was like to live inside Renee's community. I invited her in and made coffee. Over the next hour, Eileen told me her story with the careful precision of someone who had been rehearsing it privately for a long time and was only now finding someone safe to say it to out loud. $800 for a wind chime on her back porch not visible from the street, not audible beyond her own yard. $1,200 for a guest parking violation when her daughter visited for a long weekend and parked 2 inches past the designated area. The lien threat had come 6 weeks after the parking fine, delivered in a letter that referenced her estate and her heirs. She was 73 years old, and they had put that in writing. She had paid, both times, because the alternative was a legal fight she couldn't afford, against an organization with a retainer attorney and no apparent reluctance to use him. She had one more thing to tell me. She pulled out her phone and showed me the HOA's private community forum, a members-only group she'd been added to when she bought her home. She scrolled to a post from 3 weeks earlier, authored by the HOA president. As many of you are aware, the HOA has been managing a situation involving an unauthorized occupant on HOA-controlled land adjacent to the community. This individual has refused all notices, and is currently the subject of legal action. We want to assure our residents that the HOA is taking every necessary step to protect the integrity and property values of our community. The squatter situation will be resolved. The word squatter sat there on the screen in plain black text, posted to a private forum, visible to all 196 homeowners, about a man who had paid taxes on that land for 51 consecutive years. I took a screenshot. Frank arrived about 20 minutes after Eileen, which suggested they'd come with at least some coordination, or that Frank had been watching from across the street and decided if Eileen could do it, so could he. He was a few years younger than Eileen, built square and solid, in the way of men who spent decades being told to stand straight. He sat down, declined the coffee, and told his story without much decoration. $400. A flag bracket on his front porch 1 inch wider than the HOA's approved dimensions. He hadn't known about the dimension requirement. Nobody had told him when he bought the house. The fine arrived 48 hours after a compliance walk. When he had gone to the next board meeting to dispute it, the HOA president had announced to the room that Frank was at risk of losing access to community amenities if he continued to challenge enforcement decisions. She'd said this publicly, in front of his neighbors, about a man who had not missed a single mortgage payment in 14 years and had served 3 tours overseas. He'd paid the fine. Then he'd stopped going to board meetings. After they left, I sat with what they'd told me for a while. Then I drove to the county recorder's office. I pulled the original 1,974 deed, a certified copy this time, on official county paper with the recorder's stamp. Then I asked the clerk to pull every annual tax record associated with that parcel identification number going back to the beginning. She came back with a thick folder. 51 years, every single entry. My name, or my father's before mine, recorded as the tax-paying owner of that parcel without interruption from 1,974 to the present. No gaps, no delinquencies, no periods of dormancy that might support a claim of abandonment. Just a long, quiet, unbroken line of a family that owned something and kept proving it year after year, because that's what you do when something is yours. I asked the clerk one more question. I asked whether a title search conducted in 2019 would have captured the 1,974 recording if the searcher had pulled a full abstract going back to original conveyance. She looked at the parcel number on her screen. "It's right here," she said. "It's been right here the whole time." I thanked her and drove home. That evening, I organized everything on the kitchen table. The certified deed copy, the tax record folder, Eileen's screenshot of the forum post, the HOA's demand letter, the title certificate the HOA attorney had handed me personally. I did not contact the HOA. I did not correct the squatter narrative on their forum. I did not call the community's management company or send a letter to the developer. I let Renee keep talking. Every word she put on that forum, every meeting where she used that word in front of witnesses, every certified letter that arrived with my name above an HOA lot number, all of it was going into the same folder. The folder was getting thick. The envelope from the county court arrived on a Wednesday. No attorney letterhead this time. No HOA logo. Just a plain envelope with the county clerk's return address in the upper left corner, the kind of envelope that carries weight before you open it because you already know it doesn't come from nowhere. I sat down before I opened it. The HOA had filed a quiet title action, a formal lawsuit entered into the county court record, asking a judge to legally declare the HOA as the rightful owner of my land. The farmhouse, the outbuildings, the gravel driveway, the stand of oaks on the eastern edge that my father had walked under every morning for 20 years. They had also filed a lis pendens. That's a legal instrument that freezes a property while the case is pending. I couldn't sell the land, couldn't refinance against it, couldn't use it as collateral for anything. On paper, my family's land was now in legal suspension, existing in a kind of held breath, while the HOA's attorneys argued in court that it had never been mine to begin with. I set the envelope on the table next to the growing folder of HOA notices. Then I went and made dinner. I found out about the community meeting secondhand. Eileen texted me a summary the following evening, a short message, careful with her words even in a private text, the habit of a woman who had learned to be cautious about what she put in writing, anywhere near anything HOA related. Renee had called an emergency meeting, standing room only, apparently 196 families, or enough of them to fill the community room to the walls. Because when the HOA president calls an emergency session about a legal action, people show up. She had stood at the front of the room and told them the squatter situation was entering its final phase. The HOA's attorney was confident. The court filing would resolve everything cleanly and efficiently. Their property values were not at risk. Their community was being protected. She received applause. I read Eileen's text twice and tried to think of the last time I'd applauded for someone who was wrong about everything. 4 days after the court notice arrived, I went to walk my own property line. I do this periodically: check the fence posts, look at the tree line on the eastern edge, make sure the drainage on the low section near the back is clear. I've done it for years. My father did it before me. A man I'd never seen before stepped out from behind a utility gate at the access point where my land met the back edge of the subdivision. He was wearing a security company vest and carrying a radio. Behind him, bolted to a fence post that stood on my property, was a laminated HOA sign that had not been there the week before. He put his hand up. "This is private HOA property," he said. "You need to leave or I'm calling the police." He said it without a flicker of uncertainty. He had been told what this land was, who it belonged to, and what to do if someone showed up, and he had no particular reason to question any of it. I didn't hold that against him personally. I took out my phone, photographed the guard, the gate, the sign, the fence post it was bolted to. Then I photographed the tree line behind him, my oak trees, visible past his shoulder, and the property marker stake that my father had driven into that ground in 1974. "I hear you," I said, and I turned around and walked back to the house. 2 days later, a second motion arrived from the HOA's attorney filed with the court, copied to my address. He was requesting that the court order me to vacate the structure within 60 days, pending resolution of the quiet title claim. The motion described my continued presence on the property as unauthorized occupation of HOA-controlled land. I had now been described in official court documents as an unauthorized occupant of land my family had owned for 51 years. That evening, I drove to my attorney's office with both documents. He read through the quiet title filing without speaking. It took him about 12 minutes. He set it down the way you set something down when you want to be careful about how you respond to what you've just read. "They still haven't pulled the 1,974 deed," he said. He wasn't surprised we'd expected this, or something like it, but there was still something that registered on his face when the reality of it was sitting in print in front of him. Their entire filing is built on a chain that starts in 2019. They're asking a judge to confirm title they cannot prove they hold. He tapped the document once. "They've given us the arena." He began building the formal response that night, a counterclaim for trespass, harassment, and quiet title in my favor. The main weapon packet, the 1,974 deed, certified. The 51-year tax record. The HOA's own title certificate, with the chain gap documented. All of it organized, labeled, and ready to be entered as exhibits the moment the case reached a hearing. Before I left, he asked me one question. He asked whether I wanted to give the HOA advance notice file a preliminary response that would show them what we had, give them the chance to amend their claim and avoid what was coming. I thought about the security guard on my property, the laminated sign bolted to my fence post, the word squatter posted in writing to 196 families, the applause at the emergency meeting. When they read the deed in court, I said, "Can they fix it?" He shook his head. A recorded deed with a clean chain and 51 years of taxes is not something you fix in a hearing. Then we go to court. He nodded once and went back to work. I drove home in the dark. The subdivision lights were on windows lit up across all those houses, families settling in for the evening, people going about their lives on land they'd been told was theirs. I didn't feel anger toward any of them. They hadn't known. The developer hadn't told them. The title company hadn't caught it. Nobody had bothered to look back far enough, but somebody was about to. They'd just filed a lawsuit in open court to take land they'd never legally owned. In 23 days, I'd be the one presenting the deed, and they wouldn't know it was coming. 2 days before the hearing, the HOA president posted to the community forum again. I know because Eileen sent it to me. She had taken to forwarding anything Renee posted publicly, not with much commentary, just the screenshot and a timestamp, the quiet diligence of a woman who had decided that documentation was the only currency that mattered anymore. This one was longer than usual. Renee thanked the community for their patience, during what she called a prolonged but necessary legal process. She noted that the HOA's attorney had reviewed all filings and found the case to be solid. She wrote, "We expect a favorable ruling. This community has been built on firm legal ground." 196 families read that and exhaled. I set my phone down and went to make coffee. The following morning, the HOA's attorney filed supplemental exhibits with the court. My attorney called to let me know. The HOA had added the developer's original title insurance certificate, the 2019 survey, and the full community plat, all of it clean, all of it consistent, all of it building forward from 2019, with the confidence of people who had never once been told they needed to look further back. The supplemental filing was thorough. It was well organized. It demonstrated the kind of meticulous preparation that makes a strong impression in a courtroom. It also didn't go back to 1974. Not by a single page. That same evening, Renee spoke at the community's regular board meeting. It was a public session open to residents, noted in the community newsletter. She addressed what she called predatory title claims being made against the HOA by outside parties seeking to destabilize the community. She used the word squatter one more time, standing at the front of a room full of her neighbors, for the public record. The woman from the neighborhood newsletter wrote it down. I wasn't there. I heard about it the next morning from Frank, who had attended because he'd started attending every board meeting after the flag bracket incident quietly, in the back row, taking notes in a small spiral pad he kept in his shirt pocket. He texted me 2 words after he got home. She said it. I texted back, "Good." That night, the night before the hearing, I drove to my attorney's office for the last time before court. He'd spread everything across the conference table. 4 labeled folders. Each one tabbed and organized the way evidence needs to be when you're handing it to a clerk, who will hand it to a judge who has 17 other cases on the same docket and no patience for disorder. Exhibit A. The 1974 deed, certified copy, county recorder's stamp on every page. The original chain, my father's name, then mine. 45 years before the HOA's chain began. Exhibit B. The 51-year tax payment record, printed from the county's own system. Every year, every payment. No gaps, no delinquencies. A document so straightforward it barely needed an attorney to explain it. Exhibit C. The HOA's own title certificate, the one their attorney had handed me personally, certified mail, with a return receipt now annotated in my attorney's careful handwriting, the chain of title gap highlighted in yellow on page 3. Their document, their gap, being used to dismantle their case. Exhibit D. 23 HOA violation notices, arranged in chronological order, beginning with the orange one from the afternoon they first walked through my gate. 23 notices issued to the deed holder of the property. 23 documents that described my land as HOA controlled, my presence as unauthorized, my existence there as a problem to be resolved. 23 pieces of paper that together formed a precise and detailed record of a prolonged bad faith enforcement campaign against a man who had never once not owned the land they were trying to take. My attorney looked at the table, then at me. "They have no idea," he said. "I know." I looked at the 4 folders, everything my father's filing cabinet had built toward, everything the last several months of silence had been protecting. I've known since the day they knocked on my door. He nodded, began returning each folder to the briefcase he'd carry into court in the morning. I drove home. The subdivision was lit up the way it always was in the evening, windows warm, porch lights on, the particular settled glow of a neighborhood where people have finished dinner and are moving toward the end of the day. 196 homes, families who had bought in good faith, paid their mortgages, planted their gardens, submitted their architectural requests to Renee's board, and believed they owned what they'd been sold. I didn't rush past. I drove at the speed limit and looked at it the same way I'd been looking at it for months, quietly, without judgment, with the particular patience of someone who knows that tomorrow will answer questions today cannot. I went inside, poured 2 fingers of bourbon, sat at the kitchen table. The filing cabinet stood in the back room behind me, the same one from the afternoon they'd first come through my gate. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what was in the bottom drawer, and I knew exactly what it was going to do in the morning. I finished the bourbon, rinsed the glass, went to bed. Tomorrow morning, I would walk into that courtroom, sit down quietly, and wait. I'd been waiting for months. One more night wasn't going to cost me anything. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Not the grand vaulted kind you see in films, just a working county courtroom, fluorescent lighting, wood-paneled walls that had absorbed decades of arguments, a judge's bench elevated enough to make the point without making a spectacle of it. The HOA's attorney sat at the plaintiff's table with 2 associates and a banker's box of organized files. Renee sat directly behind the bar, flanked by 2 board members. She was dressed formally. Her posture was precise. She looked like a woman attending a ceremony she had already planned the reception for. I sat at the defendant's table with my attorney. 1 briefcase. 4 folders. The HOA's attorney went first. He was good. I'll say that plainly. He presented the developer's chain of title with the fluency of someone who had rehearsed not just the content but the cadence, the exact pace at which to deliver each document so the judge had time to absorb it before the next one arrived. The 2019 survey, the title insurance certificate, the HOA formation documents, the community plat. He walked through each one methodically, building the picture of a legitimate community established in good faith on land properly acquired through a properly documented transaction. He argued that the HOA had acted in reliance on a clean title certificate issued by a licensed title company. He argued that the community had been built, occupied, and maintained in good faith by 196 families who had done nothing wrong. He asked the court to confirm the HOA's title and order the defendant me to vacate within 90 days. Then he sat down. He sat down the way men sit when they believe they have already won. My attorney rose without hurry. He did not open with argument. He did not lay out a framework or preview what was coming. He simply said, "Your Honor, we'd like to enter Exhibit A, the original deed to this property, recorded with the county on the 14th of March, 1974, never transferred, never encumbered, and supported by 51 consecutive years of property tax payments." He slid the certified copy to the clerk. The clerk carried it to the bench. The judge picked it up. The room did not change immediately. Sounds continued, the quiet ambient noise of a working courtroom, a pen moving somewhere, a chair shifting. The HOA's attorney sat with his hands folded. Renee watched the judge's face with the focused attention of someone tracking a verdict they expect to arrive in their favor. The judge read. He turned the page, slowed, turned back. Read the recording date again. 11 seconds passed. I counted them. Then the judge set the document down on his bench and looked at the HOA's attorney over the top of his glasses. "Counsel," he said, "this deed predates your client's chain of title by 45 years. The HOA's attorney's pen stopped moving. "Your Honor, there may be," he began. The judge raised one hand, not dramatically, just firmly, the way a man raises his hand when he has heard enough of a particular direction and intends to redirect. "Before you continue," the judge said, "I'd like to see the defendant's supporting documentation." My attorney opened the second folder. Exhibit B, 51 years of county tax records. He said it before the clerk, without narration. The document spoke for itself, a column of years running from 1974 to the present, each one marked paid, each one carrying the same parcel identification number, each one bearing my family's name. The HOA's attorney looked at it from across the room. His jaw worked slightly, but he said nothing. "Adverse possession," he said then. A lifeline. If he could argue that the land had been abandoned or unused, the HOA might claim it regardless of the deed. "Your Honor, even with a prior recording, if the property was effectively abandoned, 51 years of continuous tax payment," the judge said, without looking up from Exhibit B, no gaps, no delinquencies. He set it down. "Adverse possession requires the property to be unoccupied or abandoned. This record demonstrates the opposite. That argument doesn't survive contact with this exhibit." The HOA's attorney closed his mouth. My attorney opened the third folder. Exhibit C. The HOA's own title certificate, the same document their attorney had handed me personally, certified mail, with a return receipt. Now annotated. Page 3. Chain of title gap highlighted in yellow. My attorney placed it before the clerk and said simply, "The plaintiff's own title certificate begins in 2019. It does not account for the 1974 recording." Renee leaned forward slightly behind the bar. The judge held Exhibit A and Exhibit C side by side. He looked at them for a long moment, the 1,974 deed on his left, the HOA's chain beginning in 2019 on his right. The gap between them was not a technical footnote. It was 45 years of documented ownership that the HOA's entire case had simply pretended did not exist. One of the board members beside Renee was typing on his phone under the table. I could hear the faint tapping. There was no one to call. There was nothing to call them about. Your Honor. The HOA's attorney tried once more. His voice had changed, not broken, not panicked, but thinner. The certainty had gone out of it the way air goes out of something with a slow leak. The developer proceeded in good faith. The title company issued a clean certificate. Our clients purchased their homes in reliance on that. Good faith, the judge said, does not transfer title. That was never the seller's to transfer. He said it without heat. Just the plain, flat arithmetic of it. The developer could not convey what he did not hold. The title company's error does not create ownership where none existed. Good faith is a defense in some actions. It is not a deed. The HOA's attorney set his pen down on the table. He did not pick it up again. From behind the bar, Renee said not loudly, but audibly, in the particular way of someone who has stopped calculating whether they should speak. But we have 196 families. The judge looked up. The room went very quiet. Ma'am, he said. His tone was not unkind. It was simply exact. That is not a legal argument. That is a consequence of the developer's failure to conduct a proper title search. It is not this court's role to validate a defective chain of title because validating it would be more convenient than correcting it. Renee sat back. The board member beside her stopped typing. My attorney opened the fourth folder, Exhibit D, 23 HOA. Violation notices, arranged in chronological order. The first one on top, the orange notice, the one that had been slapped against my front door on the afternoon 3 people walked through my gate without knocking. My attorney set them before the clerk. The HOA issued 23 formal violation notices to the deed holder of this property, he said, including threats of lien, eviction proceedings, and physical blockade of property access. These notices document a sustained enforcement campaign conducted against the legal owner of record. The judge looked at the stack. He looked at me directly, for the first time since the session began. I met his eyes and said nothing. He looked back at the documents on his bench. 4 folders, 45 years, 51 tax payments, 1 gap in a chain that nobody had bothered to close. The chain is unambiguous, he said. The plaintiff holds valid title. This court finds in favor of the defendant on all counts. The quiet title action is dismissed. The lis pendens is vacated. The HOA's claim to this parcel is without legal basis. He set the deed down. I nodded once. Behind me, I heard one of the board members exhale the long, slow sound of something that has been held under pressure finally releasing. The HOA's attorney was gathering his documents with the particular efficiency of a man who wants to be done with a room as quickly as possible. His 2 associates were already capping their pens. Renee did not move for a moment. She sat with her hands in her lap and looked at the judge's bench with the expression of someone who had built something very carefully over a very long time and was only now understanding that the foundation had never been there. As the session closed, the judge noted that Exhibit D, the 23 violation notices, would be referred to the county attorney's office for review of potential bad faith enforcement conducted against a lawful property owner. The orange notice, the one she had peeled from her clipboard and slapped against my door on a Tuesday afternoon while her compliance man photographed my face. Going to the county attorney's office, I picked up my coat and followed my attorney out of the room. The written ruling arrived 10 days after the hearing. I read it at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd opened the HOA's certified letters, where I'd spread the documents before driving to my attorney's office, where I'd sat on the night before the hearing with 2 fingers of bourbon and the particular quiet of someone who has done everything they can do and is simply waiting for morning. The language was exact and without flourish. The quiet title action was dismissed with prejudice, meaning it could not be refiled. The lis pendens was vacated. All lien filings the HOA had initiated or threatened against my property were declared void and ordered removed from the county record. The court confirmed my family's deed as the valid and unencumbered title to the 47-acre parcel. At the bottom of the ruling, a single paragraph noted that the matter of the HOA's enforcement conduct, the 23 violation notices, the eviction threats, the physical blockade of the property owner's access to his own land had been referred to the county attorney's office for review. I folded the ruling and set it next to the original demand letter in the folder on the table. Then I poured coffee and stood at the kitchen window for a while, watching the morning. The financial piece took longer to sort out, as these things always do. The developer's title insurance policy activated almost immediately. That's what title insurance exists for, and the insurer had no appetite for contesting what the court had already ruled. Each of the 196 homeowners had a potential claim against the developer and the title company for selling them property built on land that had never been validly acquired. The insurer began the process of negotiating clean deed transfers, a long, complicated undertaking that would eventually give each of those families legitimate title to their individual lots, funded by the policy that should have caught this error before the first foundation was poured. The HOA itself faced a class action threat from homeowners whose equity and legal standing had been built on a defective chain. The board members, it turned out, carried some personal exposure for the bad faith enforcement campaign for the fines, the threats, the public use of the word squatter, about a man whose name had been on the county deed since 1974. My attorney negotiated a settlement with the developer and the title insurer. We sat across a conference table from 3 people in suits who had very little to say and a great deal of incentive to be reasonable. The settlement transferred the 47-acre parcel legally, properly, for the first time at a price I was satisfied with. My family had owned that land for 51 years without ever intending to sell it. In the end, I chose to let it go, but on my terms, at my number, in my own time. The 23 fines, the $5,200 of the original notice, and everything that had accumulated after it were voided in their entirety. No discussion, no negotiation. They simply ceased to exist, the way things ceased to exist when they were never legitimate to begin with. Renee resigned 12 days after the ruling. Her letter to the board was 3 sentences. She did not address the community. She did not explain. She was simply gone, and then the board meeting that followed her resignation was the quietest one the community had held in years, because the person who had filled every available silence with enforcement and authority was no longer filling it. The entire board stepped down at an emergency session the following week. A new interim board was elected. One of their first actions was to send written apologies to Eileen and Frank, formal letters on HOA letterhead, acknowledging the improper fines and clearing both liens from their records. Eileen called me after she received hers. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. The HOA's community forum post, the one that had called me a squatter in plain black text, visible to all 196 homeowners, was deleted. The neighborhood newsletter published a correction the following month. The word squatter did not appear in it. The correction was 2 paragraphs, carefully worded, and said what it needed to say, without saying more than necessary. The woman who had written it down at the board meeting had also written this. A few homeowners came to find me individually in the weeks that followed. Not many, 5, maybe 6. They apologized in the particular way of people who feel genuinely bad about something they weren't personally responsible for but were adjacent to. I accepted without making it complicated. They hadn't known. Most people don't know what they don't know. The first morning I woke up after the ruling arrived and felt the difference. The absence of something I hadn't realized I'd been carrying was a Tuesday. No certified letters in the mailbox. No orange notices. No compliance team walking through the gate. No guard at the property line. Just a morning. Quiet in the way mornings are supposed to be quiet. I thought about my father. About the afternoon in 1974 when he drove to the county recorder's office, paid the filing fee in cash, and came home with a piece of paper that said he owned something real. He'd kept that paper in a manila envelope in the bottom drawer of a filing cabinet he'd bolted to the wall because he believed anything worth keeping was worth anchoring down. He was right about that. I walked to the back room, opened the bottom drawer. The original deed was still there, the one I hadn't needed in court because a certified copy had done the work. I took it out of the envelope, looked at my father's name, then mine. The county recorder's stamp from the 14th of March, 1974. 52 years of a family that owned something and kept proving it, year after year, because that's what you do. I placed it carefully in a box. Not because it had lost its power, because it had finished what it was supposed to do.